Nathan Bell disappeared one quiet evening, leaving behind a worried wife and a neighborhood searching for answers. Until months later, when a shocking discovery in Claire Bell's own greenhouse revealed a secret far darker than anyone could imagine. On a warm Thursday evening in May, Nathan Bell didn't come home. He was expected by 6 o'clock as usual. Dinner was already on the stove and the table was set for two. Nathan never missed dinner. He was the type of man who believed in routine. Same route to work, same sandwich at lunch, same kiss on the cheek when he walked through the door. So when 7:00 p.m. passed and his phone went straight to voicemail, Claire Bell said she wasn't immediately maybe traffic, maybe a dead battery. But when midnight came and there was still no sign of him, she called the police. Well liked in his community and worked as a claims adjuster at a regional insurance firm. He had no history of erratic behavior, mental illness, or criminal activity. His colleagues described him as dependable, honest, and quiet. Detectives began by checking the basics. His car was in the driveway. His wallet and keys were found on the kitchen counter. Nothing had been packed. His phone was nowhere to be found, but his work laptop sat open on his desk, untouched since the previous afternoon. Claire told officers they had a small disagreement earlier that day. Nothing serious. She said he'd left the house on foot to cool off. That was her story, and it didn't change. When asked what they argued about, she said it was just one of those married people things. No big deal, no shouting, no threats. According to Claire, Nathan just needed space. Local community responded quickly. Within 48 hours, volunteers joined in a coordinated search. Dogs, drones, and dive teams scoured nearby woods, trails, and retention ponds. The town of West Vale was not the kind of place where people disappeared. It was a quiet, upper-middle-class neighborhood where most residents knew their neighbors by name. The idea that someone could go missing without a trace felt impossible. Media outlets soon picked up the story. Claire made a tearful appearance on local news, asking Nathan to come home if he was watching. She appeared calm but saddened, wearing his favorite sweater and holding a framed wedding photo. Still, some viewers found her composure unsettling. Police found no evidence of a break-in or foul play. No credit card activity, no sightings. It was as if Nathan Bell had walked out of his house one afternoon and simply vanished into thin air. But that would prove to be far from the truth. In the days following Nathan Bell's disappearance, Claire Bell quickly became a familiar face in the local media. Standing in front of their well-kept suburban home, she spoke calmly to reporters, thanking volunteers and urging anyone with information to come forward. She was composed, articulate, and appeared deeply concerned for her husband's well-being. To the outside world, she was the picture of a strong, loving wife, grieving but holding herself together for the sake of hope. Inside the neighborhood, opinions were mixed. Some neighbors praised her strength and bravery, noting how she never missed a search party and always brought coffee or snacks for the volunteers. She printed flyers, coordinated routes, and even organized a candlelight vigil in Nathan's honor. To many, her actions seemed heartfelt and genuine. Others, though, began to whisper, "Why didn't she seem more emotional? Why hadn't she cried during her interviews? And why was she so quick to suggest that Nathan may have simply walked away from their life?" Told anyone who asked that she and Nathan had been going through a rough patch. She said the stress of work had taken a toll on him and that he sometimes talked about needing a break from everything. She described their last conversation as tense but not alarming, just an ordinary disagreement. She admitted that things hadn't been perfect, but insisted there had never been any violence or serious conflict in their marriage. Police continued their investigation, but had little to go on. Without signs of a struggle or a crime scene, Nathan's case was stuck in a strange gray area. Was he a missing person or a man who chose to walk away from his life? Claire leaned heavily into the second theory, even telling close friends she wasn't surprised that he'd left. She mentioned his long hours at work, how he often seemed distant or distracted. She said maybe he was off somewhere starting over. Still, something didn't sit right. Nathan had never withdrawn large amounts of cash. His bank cards hadn't been used since the day he disappeared. He hadn't taken his phone, his ID, or even a change of clothes. He hadn't told anyone, family, friends, or co-workers, that he planned to leave. The idea that he'd simply walked away didn't make sense to those who knew him best. And yet, Claire remained firm. She never once said she believed he was dead, only that he was gone. As the investigation stretched into its third week, detectives began to focus less on where Nathan Bell might have gone, and more on the life he'd left behind. With no leads, no sightings, and no communication from Nathan, investigators shifted their attention to the one person who seemed to have all the answers, Claire. She had stayed consistent with her story, but the deeper they looked, the more questions began to surface. The first red flag came from the couple's financial records. Detectives discovered that just 3 months before his disappearance, Nathan had taken out a $750,000 0-cents life insurance policy. What stood out wasn't the amount. It was the fact that the policy had been unusually fast-tracked. The paperwork had been submitted, approved, and finalized in under 2 weeks, with Claire listed as the sole beneficiary. When investigators asked around, no one recalled Nathan ever mentioning a new policy. Even his brother, who handled some of his financial affairs in the past, had no idea it existed. Then there was the matter of Nathan's will. Recently updated, it left everything to Claire: home, savings, and retirement accounts. On paper, it painted a picture of a trusting, committed husband making responsible plans for the future. But it also laid out a scenario where Claire stood to gain a substantial amount of money if something happened to him. Meanwhile, subtle inconsistencies began to show in Claire's story. In one police interview, she said Nathan left the house at 5:30 p.m. after their argument. In another, she said it was closer to 6 o'clock. She also claimed he had walked out without his phone. Yet phone records indicated it was turned off abruptly around 5:40 mid-call with a coworker. Investigators began to believe that instead of telling them the full truth, Claire had rehearsed a version of events that kept her just outside suspicion. As they dug further, officers learned from Nathan's coworkers that he had recently confided in one of them about trouble at home. He hadn't shared many details, but he mentioned feeling uneasy, like Claire was hiding something from him. He was known for being private, so the fact that he'd said anything at all now carried new weight. With no physical evidence and no body, police couldn't yet accuse Claire of anything, but their focus was narrowing. They began to suspect that the truth behind Nathan Bell's disappearance wasn't in a remote forest or faraway town. It might be much closer than anyone had imagined. At the back of the Bell property, tucked between a row of manicured hedges and a white wooden fence, stood a modest glass greenhouse. To neighbors, it was just another sign of Nathan's perfectionist nature. He had built it himself 2 years earlier, turning a patch of lawn into a miniature botanical haven. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs, and a small collection of roses flourished under the panes. Nathan spent hours there on weekends, potting, pruning, and tending to each plant with quiet dedication. After his disappearance, Claire took over its upkeep. She told friends it brought her peace to continue what he loved. Every time police came to the house, they noted the well-maintained greenhouse. Nothing about it seemed odd. The structure was intact, the plants were thriving, and the soil was damp and freshly turned, as it would be in any cared-for garden. But what began to nag at detectives wasn't what they saw, it was what they didn't. Claire had spoken in great detail about the day Nathan disappeared. She mentioned dinner, their conversation, and even what he was wearing. But she never once brought up the greenhouse, which seemed strange given how important it had been to Nathan. He spent more time there than anywhere else on the property. Yet Claire acted like it didn't exist. Detectives took another look. During a casual walkthrough of the backyard, one officer noticed a small detail. The floor of the greenhouse had been modified. Originally, Nathan had designed it with wooden planks down the center and raised beds along the sides. Now the center walkway was bare dirt. When asked about it, Claire said she had removed the planks to give plants more room. It was a simple answer, but it raised more questions. Why change something Nathan had taken pride in? Why disturb a design that had worked so well? Still, nothing was technically out of place. No smell, no signs of foul play. It remained just another building in a quiet suburban backyard. But the image of that freshly turned soil lingered in the minds of the investigators. At this point, there was no evidence of a crime, but instincts told detectives not to dismiss the greenhouse. Something about it didn't feel right. In a case with no witnesses, no footage, and no clear timeline, it was the only part of Nathan's world that had been altered after he vanished. 4 months passed without a single new lead. The community searches had ended, media coverage had faded, and Claire Bell returned to something resembling a normal routine. She began going to yoga classes again, was seen shopping at local boutiques, and even posted smiling photos with friends on social media. To some, it looked like a woman healing after tragedy. To others, it looked like someone who had moved on too quickly. Then, one October morning, everything changed. A plain white envelope arrived at the Westvale Police Department. It had no return address, no stamps, no handwriting. Just a single sheet of paper inside. Typed in bold capital letters were 5 chilling words: "Check under the greenhouse floor." The letter offered no explanation, no name, no connection, but its specificity couldn't be ignored. The case had long gone cold, and the tip came out of nowhere. Still, detectives remembered their earlier observations of the greenhouse, the altered soil, Claire's vague responses. Now the cryptic message forced them to act. A judge quickly approved a warrant, and officers returned to the Bell residence that afternoon. Claire was home and visibly confused when she saw police again. This time, though, their tone was different. With shovels, ground-penetrating radar, and forensic experts, they moved directly toward the greenhouse. Officers began by clearing the plants and setting aside pots and tools. The greenhouse floor looked no different than before, just neat rows of vegetables and a freshly watered patch in the center. But as they removed the first few inches of soil, the ground changed. The texture became looser, the color darker. News of the discovery spread quickly. By evening, local headlines read, "Missing Westvale man found dead in backyard greenhouse." Neighbors stood behind yellow tape, stunned, as police sealed off the Bell property. For months, they had joined search parties, handed out flyers and checked parks and trails, never once imagining the missing man had been buried just steps from his own back door. Nathan Bell's body was transported to the county medical examiner for autopsy. Preliminary results showed a single, forceful blow to the head, likely from a blunt object. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle, and no evidence that he had fought back. It suggested he had been caught off guard. Forensic analysts estimated the time of death aligned precisely with the evening Claire had reported him missing. The blue tarp he was found in had traces of potting soil, bits of shattered ceramic, and a faint smear of dried blood. Inside the greenhouse, police found a rusted gardening hoe with a small crack along the wooden handle. It had been washed, but not thoroughly. Under UV light, specks of blood and hair were discovered embedded in the grain. The tool was collected as the potential murder weapon. Detectives also revisited security footage from nearby homes. One video showed dim backyard lights switching on around 5:50 p.m., the day Nathan vanished, then shutting off roughly 20 minutes later. Claire had previously claimed Nathan left around 5:30. The timeline matched too closely. Claire Bell was arrested the next morning. Police arrived with a warrant and placed her in handcuffs without incident. Her expression was blank, neither shocked nor emotional. Inside her home, investigators found Nathan's phone hidden behind a panel in the laundry room. Data showed it had been turned off manually the evening he disappeared. Text messages from that day revealed nothing alarming, just a few routine exchanges about dinner plans. As the case came into focus, the horror of the situation settled in. Claire had continued living in the home for months, sleeping peacefully each night while her husband's body decomposed beneath the greenhouse she carefully tended. She had appeared on television, comforted friends, even lit candles at the vigil, all while keeping the truth buried under layers of soil. The image was more than chilling, it was calculated, controlled, and prosecutors knew they were dealing with a crime that was far from impulsive. With Claire Bell in custody, investigators began piecing together the final motive behind the murder. What emerged was a chilling portrait of calculated deception, driven not by rage or desperation, but by greed. The financial trail told much of the story. Just weeks after Nathan disappeared, Claire had contacted his life insurance provider. She asked about the steps required to file a claim and expressed concern about how long the process might take. At the time, her request didn't raise alarms. Missing persons cases often led to early inquiries about policies. But now it was clear she hadn't been looking for answers. She had been preparing for a payout. The $750,000 0-cents policy, newly issued just 3 months before Nathan's death, had Claire listed as the sole beneficiary. Detectives discovered emails between her and their insurance agent, in which she seemed unusually eager, even asking how long she'd have to wait if Nathan remained unfound. This was sent barely 10 days after his disappearance. There was no sign of grief, only urgency. Then came the biggest revelation. Claire had been having an affair. Phone records and text messages revealed frequent late-night communication with a man she had met at a local yoga studio. Their messages grew increasingly romantic in the months before Nathan's death. In one exchange, she told him she was trapped in a dead marriage and needed to start fresh. Further investigation revealed the relationship had intensified right around the time Nathan applied for the life insurance policy. Detectives began to suspect Claire may have encouraged him to increase his coverage, possibly under the guise of planning for their future. She had even helped him fill out some of the paperwork. To prosecutors, the timeline was clear. Claire had been planning her husband's death. She waited until the insurance policy was active, killed him during a seemingly ordinary evening at home, and buried him in a spot she could control, one that allowed her to monitor the grave while pretending to grieve. The greenhouse wasn't just a convenient hiding place. It was a calculated choice, one she knew would be overlooked, maintained, and protected. There was no evidence that her lover had been directly involved, but messages suggested he knew more than he ever admitted. Regardless, Claire stood alone in court, facing charges of first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and obstruction of justice. What had once looked like a case of a missing man was now unmistakably a cold, deliberate act of betrayal. As the trial approached, the prosecution dug deeper into Claire Bell's past, and what they found painted a far more sinister picture than anyone expected. This wasn't her first experience with sudden tragedy. Years before she met Nathan, Claire had been briefly married to a man named Eric Dalton. The marriage had ended abruptly when a fire broke out in their home, killing Eric in his sleep. The cause had been ruled accidental, faulty wiring in an old space heater. Claire, who had been out running errands at the time, collected a modest life insurance payout and moved to a new city soon after. At the time, no one questioned the incident. But now, in light of Nathan's murder, authorities began to wonder if history had quietly repeated itself. Further investigation revealed another troubling episode. A restraining order filed by a former boyfriend, sealed shortly after it was issued. The details were vague, but the man had accused Claire of stalking, manipulation, and threatening behavior after their relationship ended. He had moved out of state shortly after the order was granted. Claire's outward charm and composure had always been her shield. She was articulate, polite, and seemingly devoted. But behind that, a disturbing pattern was emerging. Intimate relationships followed by control, sudden violence, and financial gain. Detectives also discovered Claire had racked up significant credit card debt in the year before Nathan's death. Shopping sprees, spa appointments, and luxury purchases were common, well beyond what her and Nathan's income could comfortably support. Her financial troubles appeared to intensify right around the time she encouraged Nathan to expand his life insurance coverage. These findings were not part of the original investigation, but they were presented during pre-trial hearings to establish motive and character. Prosecutors argued that Claire had a history of manipulation and had orchestrated Nathan's murder not just for freedom, but for profit. What made it more chilling was the methodical way she had gone about it. No panic, no mess, just cold calculation to the community. The revelations were deeply unsettling. The woman they had once comforted and supported now appeared to have spent years living a double life. Friends questioned every conversation, every smile, wondering how much of it had ever been real. Claire Bell had woven a perfect image of a grieving wife, but now, with her past exposed and her secrets unraveling, the truth could no longer be buried. The courtroom was packed the day Claire Bell's trial began. Reporters, neighbors, and curious onlookers filled the seats, eager to witness the unfolding drama of a case that had shocked the quiet town of Westvale. The atmosphere was tense, an almost tangible mix of disbelief, anger, and fascination. Many who had once stood beside Claire now watched her as a suspect accused of cold-blooded murder. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. They began by recounting Nathan Bell's disappearance and the months of searching that had gone nowhere. Then came the shocking discovery in the greenhouse, revealing the chilling details of his burial beneath the soil Claire had tended. The forensic evidence, the blow to Nathan's head, the blood on the gardening hoe, and the careful wrapping in the tarp, painted a grim picture. Witnesses testified to Nathan's steady, dependable nature and how out of character it was for him to simply vanish. Co-workers described his unease in the weeks before his death, and friends spoke about Claire's growing secrecy and erratic behavior. Neighbors recalled seeing Claire maintaining the greenhouse in a way that seemed almost ritualistic. Then the financial records were introduced. The rushed life insurance policy, Claire's extravagant spending, and her communications with the insurance company shortly after Nathan disappeared. Text messages revealing her affair were shown on screens, painting a portrait of betrayal and calculated coldness. Claire's defense team tried to cast doubt on the evidence. They argued there was no direct proof she had committed the murder and suggested the body might have been placed in the greenhouse after Nathan's death by someone else. They also pointed to the lack of witnesses and the possibility that Nathan had left of his own accord. But the jury wasn't convinced. Throughout the trial, Claire remained composed. She showed little emotion, her eyes often fixed on the floor or the courtroom walls. She never admitted guilt, maintaining her silence when asked to testify. To many, her calmness was chilling, but others saw it as a defense mechanism. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury found Claire Bell guilty of first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and obstruction of justice. The verdict was met with mixed reactions: relief that justice was served, disbelief at the betrayal, and sadness for the life lost. The story of Nathan Bell, once just a missing man, had unfolded into a haunting tale of deception, greed, and murder. And through it all, the greenhouse remained a silent witness to the dark secrets buried beneath its glass walls. After the verdict, Claire Bell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge described her actions as cold, calculated, and heartless, emphasizing how she had exploited trust, love, and the very place she called home to commit a brutal crime. The courtroom fell silent as the sentence was read, closing a chapter that had gripped the town of Westvale for nearly a year. In the weeks that followed, the community struggled to come to terms with what had happened in their quiet suburb. Friends and neighbors grappled with feelings of betrayal and disbelief. Many spoke about how easy it was to be fooled by appearances, that someone who seemed so kind and composed could hide such darkness beneath the surface. Nathan's family held a private memorial in a small park nearby, planting a rose bush in his memory, the same kind that had grown in his beloved greenhouse. It was a simple gesture, but one that symbolized healing and the hope that, despite the tragedy, life could grow again. Meanwhile, the Bell house remained empty for months. Eventually, the property was sold, and the new owners dismantled the greenhouse. Some neighbors watched with mixed feelings as the glass panels were taken apart, hoping the structure's removal would erase painful memories. Others believed it was important to remember, to never forget the hidden horrors that had taken place just feet from their doorsteps. The case also sparked conversations about the warning signs that often go unnoticed in seemingly normal relationships. Local support groups formed, offering resources for those struggling with domestic problems and encouraging open dialogue about mental health, financial stress, and hidden abuse. For the police and investigators, the Bell case became a reminder that the most ordinary places and people could hold the darkest secrets. Their persistence in following small clues like the altered greenhouse floor and that anonymous tip proved critical in uncovering the truth years later. The story of Nathan Bell is still told in Westvale, a cautionary tale of how appearances can deceive and how even the deepest lies can eventually surface. The greenhouse, once a symbol of life and growth, had become a graveyard for secrets. And in the end, justice was served, not just by finding a body, but by unearthing the truth hidden beneath the soil.